Hello everyone and welcome to part 2 of Drum Set Snare Drums. So today we'll be talking about wood snare drums for the drum set. Please watch the introduction, part 1, where I talk about all the types of snare drums, how to choose a snare drum, etc. So here we have two Canopus Zelkovas. If you watched the first video, you saw that I had this drum on display, and I was using it to show you what a good snare drum is made of. The parts, the strainer, the snares, the heads, all that come together to make a great drum. So these are very expensive drums. I think today they're around $1,500, which is a lot for a snare drum. You definitely don't need to spend that much to get a good snare drum. But I put these on display because I consider these kind of state-of-the-art modern drums. But today I'll be showing you a mix of really old drums from the 1930s, 40s, and then up to modern wood drums. We'll go through a lot of them. And in between each clip, we'll put a pause, and I'll put the titling up there of what the drum is, so you know. So these drums right now are unmuffled. In other words, there's just nothing dampening the heads. And I just put these up here to show you the difference in the sound between the depth of the drums. And they're quite different drums. Even though they're made of the same type of shell, same hardware, the depth makes a huge difference. So you hear this drum right here. We're going to put a pad on this so it doesn't get in the way. So this is a 5x14. Very tight, very fast. And this is a 6.5x14. Again, there's no muffling, so there's going to be more ring on the deeper drum. That's pretty obvious, okay? So this drum tends to have a little bit of a looser snare response. Great for rolls, a really good jazz drum, actually. Where this drum, the shallower drum, is good for funk and R&B because it's got a lot of pop. Snares on here. Rim shots are great too. It's tuned pretty high right now. This drum is better for bigger stuff like rock or country music and even jazz. Now if we put a little muffling on there, we spoke about this in the first video, I'll be using this moon gel. It's normally not what I use, but I know that a lot of people are using this, so I'll use this today. You can hear how that response changes. Immediately it's much drier. Now these Zelkovas are very snarey drums. In other words, there's a lot of snare sound that happens, okay? Very wet sounding, I should say. Where this drum, if we muffle it, and we'll leave these mufflers on for the duration of the tests. Much tighter. Snare sound is still wet, but it's more controlled. Okay, so both these drums, in fact, every session I do, I bring both these drums, depending on, what kind of tune it is or whatever. And I'll bring some metal drums as well. They both have different personalities, different characteristics. They feel different. The deeper drum responds slower. In other words, we talked about this in the first video, so watch that. But the feel of it is deeper and thicker, and it's a slower drum because it takes more time for the air to go down and up and to create the sound. All right? So that's the difference between a 5 and a 6.5 inch drum. Good. So we'll put this down. Now, I'm going to show you a very old drum now. This is a I believe it's a 1940s Radio King. I'm not absolutely sure. You collectors out there can correct me. I'm not a drum aging expert by any means. But it's a very old drum. This is the oldest drum I own. Okay. Now, I know it's pretty old, first of all, because the badge. It's the old Radio King badge. The rims are straight rims, no flange, okay, you see them? And these are the ones I avoid playing on because they tear up your sticks. I'll put this here so I don't have to hold it. Okay, good. So this drum back in the day was considered probably one of the best snare drums besides a Gladstone, a Billy Gladstone drum. I do have one of those. I'll show you that later. This was considered probably the best drum you could get. It's solid wood shell, steam bent. Okay. You see it there, hopefully. And this one's staying together. I have some that have separated over the years. I have several Radio Kings, but again, this is my oldest one. All right. It's got these support hoops in here. So you see there. Some companies like Doc Sweeney are now making drums without those support rings and steam bent, which is pretty impressive because that was supposed to keep the drum from coming apart. Okay, so they're able to do that, and their drums sound fantastic. And I am an endorser, so I'm biased. Okay, all right. So you see this strainer here on the Radio King. This was their best strainer of the time. There's also a clamshell strainer I'll be showing you in a minute. So it works by this little lever. It actually, being as old as it is, this drum right here, like 80 years old probably at least, this strainer is held up amazingly well. It is made of brass, okay? The metal in the old days, you can't beat it. It's all held up pretty well, all the older metal, the brass parts. So whenever you can get brass on anything, I recommend it. It really, really holds up. So you see the lever here. You can adjust this lever with this little knob. I don't know if any of you have ever played on a Radio King. Now, the problem with this strainer, and I talked about this in the first video, is that the drum never goes all the way off. So in other words, this is with the strainer off. Well, first let me play it with it on so you can get a feel. Okay, that's a pretty low pitch drum. And it's low pitch for a reason. We'll get into that in one sec. We'll get to that in 1 second. The strainer never goes all the way off. If you listen to this. So if I hit the drum hard on tom setting, you get that residual snare because the strainer's throw, in other words, it doesn't go deep enough to get the snares off the head. That's very common with older snare drums. The Ludwigs had problems with this, and the Radio Kings did as well. So you have a couple choices. You can carve out snare beds a little more. Not much of a snare bed on these. There is some. You can do that. That helps some because then the snares can go farther down. All right, but it doesn't really solve the problem all the way. Or you can change out the throw off, which means re-drilling the drum, which means basically it losing all of its value if you care about that. So you may not, and then you could put like, a trick throw off or any of the great throw offs that are made today on there. All right. So I've done that to some of my Radio King drums, and I'm not going to resell them, so I really don't care. And that makes the world of difference. Then I can tighten the snares a lot and make it sound much, much better. Now, the reason why this drum does not go any higher at this moment is because it uses these claw hooks. Okay, you see them? That's what's holding the rim. Most rims, especially modern rims like this, they have holes in them where the lug goes through to the lug casing. These use these claws, and some drums are still made with these. I think they're stupid because they always break. Even I have a new Pearl Philharmonic drum that have these same claws, and they've broken, most all of them, because they cannot handle the tension when you tighten that drum. Over time, this becomes loose and cracks and breaks, and then you got to replace it. Problem on these old drums is it's really hard to find parts. Obviously, they're so old. You can get them on eBay that charge you a fortune for them, and these claws will always break. So at this point, these claws are in not good shape. I maybe have half of them that are in good shape. The other half have cracked, and the base of them is actually holding the rim. So I can't tighten them anymore, otherwise they'll just break completely off. And that is really common. So that's one of the biggest problems with owning one of these drums is you're always having to replace the claws. Now, you can change the rims, absolutely, but the problem is the way the tube lugs, lug casings are, they get offset and it becomes at an angle then. So it's not ideal. It's not an ideal solution. It goes in like this. It's never straight. So those are some of the quirks of these drums. Now this drum does have an internal muffler, and I left that in there. You can see it. It still works, but I never use it, okay? We talked about in the first video about using external muffling so it's not pushing up against the head. So most of these old drums will have an internal muffler, but don't use it. So that's a 1930s or 40s, not sure, Radio King. Someone will write in, I'm sure, and correct me. All right? So put that down. Now let's show you another Radio King, a less expensive model. Oh, and by the way, this drum has 8 lugs where the other one had 10. This drum has 8 lugs. The whole lug thing, how many on a snare drum, it's not a big deal. Don't let anybody tell you it is. It doesn't make a difference. There's drums that I have that have 10 lugs. They're great. And there's drums that I have 10 lugs that are not great. There's drums that I have that have 8 lugs that are great, and some that are not great. But between them, 8 and 10, it doesn't really matter. They both tune up well. It's enough tension for the head. 8 is fine. 10 is fine. Okay? So don't worry so much about that. Now this has a clamshell strainer. Okay? These were pretty much the worst. These are the original snares. I left them on there just so you can have a laugh, but they get pretty messed up over time. Okay? And this drum is really old as well. It's probably from the 40s. Okay? It's got that nice pearl white finish that will turn yellow over time. That's part of the character of the drum. This actually has a more modern Slingerland badge, so maybe it's from the 50s. Someone tell me, okay? But this was probably a student drum. But again, it's a one-piece shell, okay? So the shell is in fair condition. It's got a little crack. Probably can't see it. A little crack here. That's where the reinforcement rings are. They would separate, okay? Other than that, it's got a muffler with 2 little muffling devices there. Again, I don't use it. And it's actually not a bad sounding little drum. It's good for jazz. This strainer is a deal killer though, because it's well, you'll see right now. So put a little piece of duct tape on there. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's a emergency muffler, okay? So the strainer here has different settings, so you can actually, leave it. That's pretty cool, actually. You can get it less, more, and that's supposed to be off, okay? So in the middle, again, residual snare noise. That is the problem. So you can never truly turn this drum off. Now this drum does, and as do all clamshell strainers, have an adjustment on the other side, which is, you have to have that for the clamshell because of the way it attaches right to the snares, okay? So if we adjust that, okay, it does better, but again, still residual snare noise. Now you might say, oh, that's because your snares are all screwed up. That's true. I put these back on. And again, with these clamshell strainers, you have to modify any new snares. They have to have a screw hole in them to put them on there, okay? But when it tightens up, you see what happens. Okay? So, not too bad. All right? But actually, I put other snares on here. It does the same thing. So again, the throw is not necessarily enough to, if you really whack that drum hard, if you do rim shots on the tom setting, you're still going to get residual snare noise, which makes it useless in a recording situation, because you don't want that, okay? But anyway, it's not a bad drum. It's off and on, okay? And you can tighten that up, and you can manually adjust this as you're playing. I've used this drum when I'm playing any kind of Dixieland recording or any kind of old New Orleans kind of second line stuff. This is a really old sounding drum. If you ever listen to Baby Dodd, some of those super old recordings, that's the vibe, okay, that you're going to get. So that is a newer well, I'll say newer Radio King, probably from the 50s, maybe the 40s. All right, so those are the two kinds of strainers you'll run into with Radio Kings. Good. All right. So we'll take a little pause here, and I'll get some other drums up. So here we have two Doc Sweeney drums. These are extremely modern drums. These were just made last year, so 2019, as compared to the previous Radio Kings. And we'll show you some differences. These are some drums that they made for me. I am an endorser of theirs. I bought I have a kit of theirs, which is Olivewood, African Olivewood. It's their Stave drums. So you can see there. They don't look like Stave drums. They do such a good job. It's hard to tell, but you can tell by the way the grain is running straight up and down. There, see? And this is a pretty hard wood, so the drum is very bright sounding. So we'll play Tama off. I have about 8 snare drums around me, so hopefully this won't resonate too much. And this is without muffling. So that's with the snares off. So as you can see, Stave drums, in my opinion, they ring a long time. Even though they're a little thicker, they ring a little bit longer than ply drums. Okay, this is a thin Stave drum. Some of the Brady Stave drums I have are much thicker. Okay? And the bearing edges are not real steep on this drum either. And with the snares on, I'm going to have to muffle this. Okay, it's nice sound. It's good sounding drum. And then this one, which is a much deeper drum. This is a 6.5, where this is a 5. It's got a ton of power. It's beautiful, nice ring. All right, but I just wanted to show you two different size Stave drums. And I'll normally muffle this one down quite a bit. Got to use 2 moon gels, okay? I consider this a wet sound, like it's very snary. Now you see, one interesting thing about these drums are the strainer. It's kind of a new design where you can have it half off, which I like. Very wet, okay? Don't use that a whole lot, but it kind of resembles the Radio King sound. And then, of course, all the way off. All right, so those are 2 Stave drums. Good, we're going to put these down so we're safe. Okay, so let me show you some deep drum comparisons now. So you can see what different drums of the same size but different shell construction sound like. Let's make sure we got all this. Okay. All right, so we just heard a Doc Sweeney Stave drum. This is a Gladstone Stave drum made by Morris Lang, formerly of the New York Philharmonic. And you see how thick that shell is. This is a gorgeous drum. All right. So really great. It's very heavy, by the way. It's the heaviest wood drum I have. It probably weighs about, I don't know, 15 pounds. Now, I don't know how much you know about these Gladstone drums. There's a ton of stuff on the internet about them, but you can look them up. But this is the throw-off. It's a great throw-off. It always was. These are all original parts, by the way. And you can adjust the throw-off like that, see? All right? So there's a knob on the top of the throw-off. Now, this knob, by the way, I was touching that by accident, that's for the muffler, all right, which I don't use, but which is really cool. It's the coolest muffler I've seen. It's 2 little mufflers and very thin rod, so it does not rattle. But I usually leave it off, but that's what this is for. This on top is for adjusting the snares, okay? Now, I have not tuned this drum because I wanted to show you something. This is a special key that these drums use. Look at that. It's confusing. All right? So each one had a different, each part of this key, there's 3 of them, had a different purpose. You could tune this drum, every part of it, from the top. So one key would adjust both lugs, in other words, bottom and top, together. The other key would adjust just the top, and the other key would adjust just the bottom. And Gladstone had this patented. It's actually really incredible. You could tune this drum up without taking it off. You know, you don't have to mess with the bottom. The only problem is when you change heads, it takes forever because of the way it's designed. And the lugs do strip out if you're not really careful. So if you have one of these drums, if you're lucky enough to have one of these drums, they go really high on eBay and stuff. Then you'll see what I mean. You just got to go very gently, especially when you're dealing with the bottom head. Okay, so always go super slow. Now, my secret weapon, I was talking to you about these things before. I know the duct tape we talked about for muffling, emergency muffling. That's WD-40. You never want to leave home without it, all right? In the apocalypse, you know, can of this and some duct tape, you're all good to go. At least it'll make it a little smoother. So one thing I do whenever I change heads on this drum, I always put a good bit of WD-40 in there to keep it going smooth so I don't strip those by accident. Also on certain strainers, like we'll show you later, like Tama strainers, it's great to spray this stuff in there because it's an open design and it oxidizes. So this stuff is really good. It kind of smells bad, but I would always keep it around. I'm not an endorser, okay? But it's very handy for drummers. It's good to spray in the lug casing holes to keep things running smoothly. Your strainers, everything. All right? It's even good for cleaning parts like rims and be careful. Don't go crazy with it. But, you know, metal parts, it works great. All right? So that's that. Good. So that's how that key works. Now you know. And the screws right back on to the shell there. It's kind of like almost where Gretsch got their design of putting the drum key in the shell. And let's see what this drum sounds like, and we'll tune it up a little if we have to. Ah, not bad, so we won't. It's a really good sounding drum. Now, you could actually even use this as a classical snare drum. You just need to change the snares because it's got that kind of dry, tight feel to it, okay? Now, muffled sounds a little bit better. So that thick shell, that thick Stave shell, gives you that really almost compressed kind of sound, which is super desirable for some kind of music, all right? Some types of music. So that is a Gladstone drum, the modern version of it, all right? The Arnie Lang version of it. Lang percussion, I think it's called. I'll show you some close-ups so you can see it, all right? Good. So we'll put that down. Now, let's talk about some of my other favorite deep snare drums. This is a GMS drum. GMS makes great drums at fair prices. I've always been a big fan of their drums. I used to have a drum kit of theirs. They're just really well made. Nothing fancy. Good shells, good construction. Everything lines up. They used to, you know, there's different color rims. It's pretty neat looking. I had a whole kit like this. I sold the kit but kept the snare drum. One thing I don't like about their drums are the strainers as much as some other drums because they're tight in there. Okay, so again, what you can do is you can spray a little DW40, just like that. Won't hurt anything. Okay, and work it in, and that smooths it out immediately. So over time, your strainers will do that. They just get some gunk in there. Okay, but again, this strainer is noisy, so and it can get jammed up. It's one of the unfortunate things about their snare drums is that. Other than that, it sounds great. It's very fat sounding. No muffling yet on that one. If you've ever played a Noble and Cooley snare drum, Those are one-piece steam bent shells. I also have one of those, but it's up in the mountains right now, so I can't go get it because we're stuck inside here with this pandemic. So I wish I could show you that one. That's a beautiful drum. It's a really old Noble and Cooley from the 80s. So this sounds very, very similar to that. Good snare sound, sensitive. Not as sensitive as the Zelkova, but close. When I play drum set with the Symphony, which is quite often, this is the drum that I use because it's a good all-round drum. And if I have to play a bunch of closed buzz rolls, like, works really well. Okay, you don't want to use a classical snare drum on a drum set. Everything sounds really tight and just not authentic for any kind of jazz or anything like that. So that's a beautiful drum. That's a Noble and Cooley. I'm sorry, a GMS drum. And let's see if this has a date in it. Yeah, this was made in 1991. I got it. So quite some time ago. All right. Good. So put this aside. All right, let's see here. Oh, yeah. Okay. Good. This is a Ludwig. No date in there. Had this for a long time, and honestly, I can't remember where I got it. It's a pretty drum. Now, we're going to talk a lot about Ludwig in another video because there's a lot to talk about. But for all intents and purposes, this is the strainer. It's strange, okay, but it's functional and it's pretty quiet. It works like that. Does not have a strainer control on the other side, so you're stuck with this pretty much. And it adjusts with this knob like that. I don't really like that too much, okay? All right. Also, like most Ludwig drums, the strainer never really engages what I feel like fully on the drum. So there's always a little bit of residual snare buzz, which if you watched my intro video is a deal killer pretty much. So this head is worn out. This is a drum I used to teach, you know, on the drum set sometimes. So I don't normally change those heads. There's a few of those, just because I'd be changing them every week, and I just leave them on. They're fine. All right, so this is kind of a wet sounding drum, and if you listen to the ring, it does have good sustain, and it's tuned a little low. We got some snare residual buzz from down there. Okay, if we muffle it, I'll give you the sound of this. So you see the snares, no matter what you do, I'm sure you guys have had drums like that. The strainer is a problem, okay? So that's why I don't use this drum out in the studio. I don't use it to play live because it's finicky, and you have to really spend a lot of time tweaking it, tuning it to get it to work, all right? But I haven't sold it because it's pretty, and I use it for teaching. So that's a Ludwig wood 7-inch drum. Okay, put that down. Okay, now let's look at this drum. Oh, now we're talking. Sonor. Sonor makes amazing drums. They always have. I have a Rosewood kit from the 70s. This is a remake drum. In other words, it was a reissue of Rosewood outer ply and inner ply and beech in the middle. Okay, it's not solid rosewood. It's a ply drum. The Sonor is known for at least their older drums. They're thick shells. A piece of moon gel on my shoe. That happens. So their drums are going to tend to be drier. Now this head, that's a fiber skin. I threw that on there so you could hear one of those. That actually sounds good on this drum. Let's see what this drum sounds like here. Not bad. Very ringy. Okay. Oh, by the way, Sonor drums use a special key, which is a pain in the neck. So it's not a normal drum key. It's got a little slot in there. So if you don't have one of these, you got to use a screwdriver, which is really inconvenient. And lots of times I've left this at home by accident, and so I have some extras that I bought. Now I do have the original 7-inch drum that came with my Rosewood kit, But again, that's up in the mountains right now, and I cannot get it because we are frozen in place here because of the pandemic. So I'll show you that at a later date. And that drum is incredible. It's one of my favorite snare drums. So that helped a lot. And this drum, now this drum has a pretty nice strainer. It's not like the original Sonor strainers, which I even like better than this, but it throws off completely. No problems there. That snare you hear from some of these other drums I have laying around, okay? And it's just a really, really nice drum. Let's see if we could find a piece of moon gel. So I would muffle this a little bit. And this is a pretty snarey drum, once again. Okay, so because it's, you know. But the good news with this drum is the actual strainer works really well. So if you tighten it up, you can get rid of most of that. You can't do that on all snare drums. Sometimes you can tighten it and tighten it and tighten it and nothing works. All right? But on these Sonor drums, they always work really well. I've never had a Sonor snare drum that didn't function up to professional capacity. So you see the strainer and you see the bottom. Now, on these drums, there's no bearing edges. It's important to know, okay? So if that's something that's going to be a deal breaker for you, I shouldn't say there's no bearing edges. There's no snare bed. Sorry. Okay, there are bearing edges, obviously. There's no snare bed. So some people won't buy a snare drum without that. There are none. So, and that will contribute a little bit to the snariness of the sound. These make great jazz snare drums. All the old Sonor snare drums, they just do. They just sound terrific. Okay. All right, good. So we're going to take a pause, and I'm going to show you a really cool drum. Let me go get it out and put some of these away, and I'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. Here we have two Tama snare drums, high-end snare drums. So this is an Exotix snare drum. I have a whole kit just like this. It's Bubinga ply, solid, all Bubinga. All the plies are Bubinga. And this drum, I believe, was made in 1993, if I'm not mistaken, with the rest of the kit. It's gorgeous, gorgeous inlay. And sorry about the head, but I use this drum to teach on one of my kits, and I haven't changed it in a while. And actually, embarrassingly enough, it's the original head. So however old that is, it still sounds good, which is pretty amazing. All right. And then this is a Tama maple Starclassic drum. Probably from the early 2000s, I would guess. I have a whole kit like this as well. Really nice drum. Nothing fancy about it. Now you'll notice this drum's an 8-lug drum. This is a 10-lug drum, okay? Not that it matters, but that's something to notice. Also, I have a different head on this. I just used it for a show where I had to hit pretty hard, so there's a few little things in there. I'm going to change it. But this is an Aquarian Head. And those are pretty good. These is called modern vintage. They're good for brushes. The only thing, they'll chip after a while, so pieces of them will come off, and then the brush gets stuck. So and they dent very easy because they're thin if you have to play hard. On this show, I had to play some pretty hard stuff, pretty loud stuff, and actually with bell mallets on the snare drum. I think that's what dented it because I had to go really quick from bells to snare. Well, anyway, so now this is one of those strainers where I told you before you have to spray them down. So this is working really smooth now, but in that little slot, you can see it there. That gets a lot of dirt in there over time. And rather than take it apart, just spray it with WD-40 and it'll work really smooth, okay? So if that's giving you problems, that's what you want to do. Now, this is a fairly light drum. because the shell's a maple shell. This drum's about twice as heavy because Bubinga is a very heavy wood. So they're going to sound a little bit different, but not too much different. So we'll muffle one and we'll show you what they sound like. Got a little piece of moon gel on each one. Oops, sorry. Really good rim shot. This is what I call a neutral drum. In other words, it always sounds good. It never sounds insanely good, but it always sounds really good. So if you're going to have an all-round snare drum, this kind of drum would be the one. It's very bright, so it's got a good strainer, it's got good response, it feels good, and probably not too expensive. I would think these drums would be about maybe $600 to $700. It's a great all-round snare drum, but probably not the best of anything. You know, by best I mean Zelkova quality, all those other things, different specialized drums. But if I was going to have a desert island drum, this would definitely be on my list, okay? So a Tama Starclassic, Exotix, and this is Bubinga. Now, this is another really nice drum. Again, Starclassic maple. Just a little bit darker, so not as bright, because the shell, maple's like a quarter of it, as hard as Bubinga. And it's a little slower in response. But it's nice, and it's a really nice jazz drum. Okay, Tama makes just great drums. Again, I am not an endorser of Tama. All right, and they're so thin, some of these shells, they just react super quick. I think they're the thinnest shells that I know of, the Tama shells. This is like, it can't be more than 3/16 of an inch, okay? So it's super thin. And the tom sound. Okay, good. Let's switch these out. All right. Now, I got a little treat for you. I dug these out. This is an old Slingerland Spitfire snare drum, like the kind Buddy Rich used to use. Okay, oops, that's good. The knob came off, which is likely to do with some of these old drums. This is a ply drum. So this is post Radio King, all right? We'll see if we can find that later. Have to put that back on. Okay, and then this is a gem. This is a Gretsch Vineyard Centennial drum made of elm on the outer plies. On the outer ply. The inner ply is just the regular Gretsch shell, okay? The Jasper shell. So this drum is one of my favorite snare drums. I guess if you've watched some of my jazz videos and even some of my snare drum videos from my book, I use this drum whenever I'm playing a lot of jazz. I always keep a calf head on it. You see that calf head? That's been on there for about 10 years now. I had another one on there, but I broke it. And snare-wise, these are the original snares. This drum, see if there's a date. Now, just a label that says 5 of 5. I believe it's one of the only little jazz kits that the Centennial series ever made. They were supposed to make 100, but I think they didn't get that far. And it's in 1982 when I think Gretsch was changing hands. So these drums are gorgeous, and they sound amazing, and they're great with brushes. And this, to me, is the ultimate jazz snare drum. Really not good for that much else, though. But for that, nothing beats it. So, let me muffle this. So it's the perfect combination of wet and deep, okay? So the wetness of the snares And it's got just the right amount of ring. No muffling, okay, at all. Got a nice rim shot. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with Gretch Strainers, but they are a little bit wobbly. As you see there, they're all like that, the old ones. But they work really well, and they go off all the way, and they have a nice, satisfying snap. Now, when you're recording, you don't want that. You have to go really slow, and that can be a little bit of a pain. What I do is sometimes I'll put a little piece of moleskin there to soften that sound, okay? The contact right there. All right? Then also Gretsch has the really cool key in the drum thing, all right? So you know where the key is at all times, all right? So this is a 10-lug snare drum. Oh, by the way, these little bumpers, I know some of you ask about that. I don't know who makes these, maybe Camber or Canon, one of those companies. But this is just to keep my toms from getting hit by the snare drum, you know, if I move my leg or something when I'm getting up. So I don't dent up the toms, okay? You should, if you have a nice drum set that you don't want to mess up the small first tom, you might want to use that. All right, now this drum, interesting story real quick about this drum. I've had this drum since I was probably 16 years old, and when I moved to North Carolina, the first week I was here, my car got broken into, and they stole a set of Gretsch round badge drums, which basically just about killed me. And this drum, which I was using with it at the time, because I have a Gretsch metal drum, which you'll see in one of my other videos that I luckily wasn't in the car. I used a wood drum on that gig. So I was tired. I came home probably 2 or 3 in the morning from a gig. Said, oh, this is, you know, I went in the house. Next morning I got up, car's broken into, and the drums were gone. So moral of that story is don't leave your drums in the car no matter how tired you are, okay? Then several years later, I was teaching, and I was telling this story to a student of mine, and he said, wow, that drum sounds familiar. And he sent me a picture of it, and it was this drum. And he had found it in a pawn shop. And he basically just gave it back to me. I offered to pay him for it, obviously, because he paid for it. But he just gave it back to me, which was a really awesome thing. So, Jimmy, if you're watching, thank you again. And the Gretsch drums, I don't know what happened to those. I never saw them again. So they're out there somewhere. So they're round badge Gretsch drums from the 50s, beautiful drum set. So if anyone has them, I want them back. All right. Anyway, this drum is a little bit out of tune right now, but it's we'll tune it up real quick. It's a nice snare drum. It's a good all-around drum. You see one of these on eBay for a good price, you might want to snatch it up. The only thing about it is, like some of the old Slingerland stuff, we talked about it, parts tend to fall off and fall apart, and, you know, not the best construction. All right, so. You know, you want that great Buddy Rich sound, that's the drum for you, okay? So I believe this was called the Spitfire. Somebody correct me, please, but really nice drum. Probably around the 70s, I would say. All right, let's put that down and put this down very gently. Good, now, okay, let's show you an interesting drum. This is a pork pie snare drum. I love pork pie drums. I just think they're the best bang for your buck out there. I have a pork pie drum set, one of my many sets, and it's fantastic. I use it, actually if you go back to some of my older videos, it's a green set. I use it on a lot of my funk videos. It's just got a great feel, a great sound. And this is actually the snare drum that came with it, although it's not green, and it's a decent drum, very light. The rims are not die cast. I mean, you can get these for a couple $100 on eBay or Reverb if you look, and they're a great deal. Not an all-round drum, though, but it's a smaller drum. It's a 13 by 6.5, okay? So. So right now it's kind of loose. All right, it's got a ton of pop. It's a little bit thin because of the size of it. And the shell and the weight, it's very light. So that, I think, contributes to the thinness. The shell just looks like a normal Keller ply shell. All right? And this drum was made 1999, okay, with the rest of that kit. So that's a pork pie snare drum. Okay, now, this is a Yamaha. I love Yamaha drums. This is a Yamaha Maple Custom, okay? This drum has seen a ton of use. For years, this was the drum I took on gigs. I have the set that matches it. It's transparent black. It's a jazz kit. Some of the rims are scratched up because, like I said, I've taken this. It's probably played, 500-600 gigs with this drum. It's a great all-round drum. Another one of those desert island drums that, like that other Tama I showed you, that would be worth getting. If you had one snare drum, this could be it. All right? Made really well, as most all Yamaha stuff is. Never had one problem with it. Any abuse has been my fault. Scratches or whatever, okay? The throw-off is fantastic. Not as smooth as the Zelkova. There's a little bit of a kink in there when you first turn it on and turn it off. The Zelkova is just, you just touch it with your finger and that's it. Okay? But not bad at all right? And I put a new head, a Diplomat, I was running out of heads, but a Diplomat fiber skin head on here. So let's see what that sounds like. Not too bad for a brand new head. Sometimes, all the time they need to break in about a week after you put them on. Sounds good already, so. Yeah, so this drum is so easy to tune. It's basically, troubleless, low maintenance. That would be the two words I'd use for it. Always sounds good. Not the greatest, just of anything I have, but always sounds good, always. And I'm never disappointed with this drum. Sounds great with brushes. Sounds great for all kinds of music. So that's a good one, all right? If you see them, they probably run about maybe $800 in good shape. One of these, they don't make them anymore. I know that, but these are great drums. And maple shell. Okay, now something you might be interested in. This is a Brady drum. Brady drums are obviously very famous. They're no longer in business. Let's see, where's that logo? Oh, there it is. Okay, pretty cool logo there. It's got a trick throw-off. These are the best throw-offs that you can replace your drums with. They're generic. Okay, very smooth. This plastic piece will break, though. Be very careful with it. Okay, and you have to replace the whole strainer if you break it. I've broken one in a case, okay? So that's this piece right here, all right? But other than that, it works really good. This is a really, really nice snare drum. It's got tons of ring to it. Again, it's a Wandu burl, so it's Wandu, that's the wood. Nice long ring, and that's unmuffled. Okay. Now, what we're going to do here for a second is we're going to compare this, because I'm interested, with this Zelkova. This is the original one that I used, okay, back in the other video. So let's see here. They're both roughly the same size. It looks like 5 inches. So, and we'll muffle them up so this is fair. Okay, good. So let's see. Here's the Zelkova, and we'll muffle this. All right, and here's the Brady. Tighten the snares just a little. It's a little bit looser. Okay, they both sound great to me. Different though, isn't that interesting? So where the Brady sounds a little wider, maybe wetter, and seems to have more of an impact, the Zelkova feels faster and tighter to me. And not as ringy, so more focused. From where I hope that's coming across over there. The sound seems like a laser beam, you know, goes right through you. And that's probably because the bearing edges are so sharp and the drum's so heavy. This Brady drum is not real heavy. The Zelkova is very heavy, all right? They both have the die-cast rims I've changed. It's rim shots. So the Brady drum rings a little longer, for sure, than this. This is a thicker shell. So more focused sound, more definition, deeper, where the Brady's wider sounding. And I would say the Zelkova has a deeper, like more of a tuning range than the Brady. The Brady pretty much only sounds good up high, tuned up high, from my experience. The Zelkova sounds good in a much bigger range. So, but both great drums. Obviously, if you can find a Brady, you can't go wrong buying them. They're made very well. The only problem I ever had with a Brady was with a Stave drum that fell apart on me, but we fixed that. Okay, but really good drums. That's a Brady Wandu Burl 14x5 snare drum. Okay, so I think that does it for the regular wood drums. In a minute here, we'll take a pause and I'll set up some specialty wood drums so you can hear those. Thanks. Okay, we're back. Now we're going to talk about some specialty drums. In other words, drums that are different sizes from normal, vastly different sizes, and also used for special things, not as your main snare drum necessarily. So here we have two very nice drums. This is a Tama Starclassic 6x12" snare drum. Okay, and here we have a GMS 7x12" snare drum. All right, so this one's just a little bit deeper. I've used both these drums for years for different things. I used to play some drums and bass music, and both these snares work really well. They also work well as a left hand, in other words, left side snare drum, like an extra utility snare. When the snares are off, it makes a great little timbali. So if you're playing some reggae and you have it right near your hi-hat, super useful, very cool. Okay, so we'll start with this Tama. Again, it has this Tama throw off, as you see there. That's the one that sometimes needs to be sprayed with some WD-40. And this is the same vintage as that other Tama snare drum I showed you. Okay, so probably the early 2000s. So here's what it sounds like with the snares off. Push this down. And that's with muffling. This is without. Sounds pretty good, you know. It's got a nice ring to it. It's got a nice rim shot. It could probably even be tuned somewhat higher. I have it a little lower pitched right now. And this is with the snares on. Very ringy drum. All these little drums ring a lot. So if you need something with a lot of crack and ring, that's a nice extra snare drum, okay? And let's check out the GMS. This has an Aquarian blackhead on there. I don't know if you can see that. I'll show you. Okay, these are good heads. They're very similar to the Ambassadors. So this is without the snares. So it's got a little bit deeper sound, and with the snares, this needs to be sprayed down too. So these GMS strainers, as we talked about earlier, they get tight pretty quick, all right? So you always got to spray them if you haven't used them in a little while. Okay, so that's better. Now, it's important to note that these little snare drums don't feel like the bigger drums. They just don't respond as well, to me anyway. They're good for, obviously, rim shots, little fills, but as any kind of main snare, I would not suggest it. So the verdict on that is that the deeper the drum, in the 12-inch version, obviously the deeper the sound, the bigger the sound, as opposed to... They're similar. They're very similar. Okay, so it's good to have one of these kinds of drums. Now these are the bigger of the utility drums. Let's go real small now. Take these off. Oops. Okay, so let's talk about these little micro drums. We're going to have to bring these over here. Now, a lot of these drums are mounted with a rims mount system because they're actually too small to get in any kind of snare stand, okay? So right here on my left, when we get these positioned, hopefully you can see these. This is a pork pie. This matches this little green kit I have. I think they call this a little squealer, which is a funny name. And then this is a Grover snare, even smaller. All right, these are 10-inch drums, 10-inch snare drums. Okay, so they're little tiny. I call them utility drums. They're great in little setups. If I'm doing a Broadway show and I need like a piccolo snare, but just for a few tunes, I'll stick this there. You can get them anywhere in your setup. All right, so this drum without the snares. There's a snare drum somewhere ringing, but we won't worry about it too much now. And that's this drum. Now they're both muffled with a little bit of moon gel. Okay, now with the snares on, and with the snares on here. And again. Okay, so the moral of this story, in my opinion, is if you're going to get one of these little tiny snare drums, get it as deep as you can. So they tend to really bottom out since they're so small. So if you can get, anything from a 6-inch to a 7-inch deep by 10 or 12, that's going to do you better than the shallower, smaller drums. So that's what you might take away from this, all right? They're good to have, not a necessity, of course. But if you see one and you pick it up, you want to pick it up, they're fun to play, all right? Good. Now, brought one more little thing out here. It's like, honey, I shrunk the snare drum, okay? This is from a cocktail kit that I used to have, Yamaha. It's pretty much the smallest snare drum I have. It's super cute. Looks like you put it in the dryer and left it on high. All right, so it's more like a tambourine, like a Brazilian tambourine. So very much fun to play. Has a lot of ring, good accent drum if you're playing reggae and whatnot. Okay, so that does it with the wood drums, for the wood drums. I'm going to retool here, and we'll come back with the metal drums on part 3 of the snare drum video. Thanks so much.